All right, next part of the video is number 28. We use SOHCAHTOA, find the measure of the angle. This part's not too bad. SO is sine, which is opposite of hypotenuse. CA is cosine, which is adjacent over hypotenuse, and TOA, tangent, is opposite over adjacent. So we have our angle here. Always label opposite. Across from the right angle is hypotenuse, and here's adjacent. What we're going to use is the opposite and the adjacent. So this is in terms of tan. Always put whatever the angle is next to tan. So here we don't know the angle. And that's going to equal opposite over adjacent. Since we don't know an angle, that's when you do second tan in your calculator to get the -1. Second tan, and you do opposite divided by adjacent, and you'll get your angle to be 63.4. Next one, here's our theta, here's our opposite, here's our adjacent, here's our hypotenuse. So we're given a hypotenuse and an opposite. That's going to be sine. Don't know the angle again. That's going to equal opposite over hypotenuse. Since we don't know the angle, we do the -1. So second sine of 8 divided by hypotenuse. So your missing angle is going to be 41.8. Let's go to the next page. Number 30. Here we have an angle. Here's our adjacent, here's our opposite, here's our hypotenuse. We're looking for the adjacent and the hypotenuse. It's going to be cosine. So cosine of the angle is going to equal adjacent over hypotenuse. Since we know the angle, we're going to set up a proportion and cross multiply. 16 times 1 is 16. X times cosine 60 is x cosine 60. Then divide both sides by cosine 60. Those cancel. So our final answer is 16 divided by cosine 60, which is exactly 32. Looking at the next one, here's our theta, here's our opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. Again, adjacent, hypotenuse, it's another cosine. So cosine of 40 is going to equal adjacent divided by hypotenuse. Make proportion and cross multiply. 4.9 times 1 is 4.9. X times cosine 40 is x times cosine 40. Divide both sides by the cosine 40. So your final answer is 4.9 divided by cosine 40, which is 6.396 about. That's how long the side is. Let's move on to 32. 32, not too bad. We're doing the cosine of our angle. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Here's our opposite, here's our adjacent. Across the right angle is hypotenuse. So all we need to find cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Here, look at that. We have 6. Adjacent, we have 10. We can even simplify that to 3/5. If I would have asked you to find, let's say, the sine instead, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So we don't know the opposite, but we know the hypotenuse. What you would have to do is you'd have to do the Pythagorean theorem. So a squared plus b squared equals c squared to find out this missing side. So if we did that, it would be 6 squared plus b squared equals c squared. That's the 10. Remember, the c is always hypotenuse. So 36 plus b squared equals 100. B squared would equal 64. So b would equal 8. Here's our b. Again, if this was a sine problem, opposite over hypotenuse, you would have to do Pythagorean theorem to find out the opposite, which was 8. And you could simplify that to 4/5 if you want as well. Let's go to the next one. the tangent of this angle. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. Look at that. Here's our opposite. Here's our adjacent. So it's 9 over 12, which simplifies to 3/4. If, in fact, I did ask you to find not tangent, but let's say I asked you to find a sine or a cosine of this theta, you would need the hypotenuse involved, this h. To get that hypotenuse, you would do the Pythagorean theorem again. You can only do the Pythagorean theorem with right triangles. Okay? And you can only do sine, cosine, and tangent with right triangles. If you see something with a right triangle, you can only do it with that. Let's go on to another one. Almost done, 34 and 35. We want to find the tangent. Remember, tangent is opposite over adjacent. If the sine is opposite over hypotenuse, is square root of 5 over 5. So they gave you the opposite and the hypotenuse. Let's just draw a right triangle and see what's going on. Let's say here's our theta. So we're given the opposite and we're given the hypotenuse. Again, from here, here's our theta. Always draw theta on the bottom. You could draw it on the top or whatever, but I like drawing it on the bottom. It's easier to work with. So here's your opposite, here's your hypotenuse. In order to find tan, we need this adjacent side right here. So we're going to do Pythagorean theorem to find this leg of the triangle. So I can label this A, B, and C. So we have square root of 5 squared plus, we don't know, this adjacent side. It's going to equal the hypotenuse squared. So this comes out to be 5 plus b squared equals 25. B squared is going to be 20 when we subtract over the 5. And then we're going to square root both sides to make b to be the square root of 20. So I'm going to erase this all here. And we now know that b is the square root of 20. And you could simplify, rationalize it to be 2 square root 5 if you would like. So the tangent is opposite over adjacent. The opposite is the square root of 5. And the adjacent is right here, which was the square root of 20. Again, you could rationalize and simplify it, but that is an acceptable answer. Let's go on to the last question. Here's our theta, and we want the cotangent. The cotangent is the flip of tan. So think about it. If tan is the opposite over adjacent, then if you flip it, we're looking for adjacent over opposite. Here is our theta. Here's opposite. Here's adjacent. And here's hypotenuse. You're going to have to do Pythagorean theorem again to find the missing third side. So let's say this is A, B, and C. C is always the hypotenuse. So A squared plus missing B squared is going to equal the hypotenuse squared. So we have 9 plus B squared is going to equal, if you type in your calculator, 3 square root of 5 squared. You will get 15. Subtracting over the 9, you get 6. You square root both sides. B is going to equal the square root of 6. So I can erase this right here and put in the square root of 6. Remember, I'm looking for cotan, which is adjacent over opposite. Therefore, the adjacent is square root of 6, and the opposite was 3. And there you have it. There's the cotan. Let me know if I can explain these into further detail to you in class.